Warning, this story contains extreme violence, slasher elements, and murder. I encourage you to listen to the entire story, and if you enjoy this type of content, please subscribe and press the bell icon to stay updated. The sharp, sterile smell of antiseptic filled my nose as I began to regain consciousness. My eyes fluttered open, heavy with a drug-induced fog. Blinding surgical lights overhead forced me to squint, sending a bolt of pain through my temples. Panic surged in my chest when I realized I was lying on a cold, metal operating table. My limbs felt numb, but a sickening, dull pressure radiated from my midsection. I tried to move, nothing. My body refused to respond, awake already, a voice sneered, smooth and chilling. It echoed around the room, bouncing off the tile walls in a way that made my skin crawl. I forced my eyes to focus and saw him, the surgeon. Dr. Carlisle, they called him. Renowned, they said. A genius. A master of his craft. But the man before me, this looming figure masked in a blood-streaked gown, was no healer. He was something far darker, something that thrived on flesh and agony. I glanced down, heart pounding in my ears, and my mouth went dry. My torso was splayed open like a grotesque butterfly, skin peeled back to reveal muscles, veins, and bone. I should have been screaming, but the drugs made my voice little more than a dry croak. My eyes darted around the room, and that's when I saw them, puppets. Living, breathing, broken puppets. They lined the walls, strapped to makeshift metal frames. Some hung limply, others writhed as if straining against unseen chains. Limbs were twisted and sewn in unnatural positions, mouths gaped open, trying to form words that choked out as guttural moans. Eyes bulged in faces distorted by stitches and scars. They stared at me, hollow yet pleading, pupils swimming in madness. A woman to my left extended what was left of her arm, a jagged stump ending in a crude hook of bone. It twitched and scraped against the table, a desperate, silent plea, please. I croaked, choking on my own fear. What? The surgeon leaned closer, his eyes gleaming with an unholy hunger behind his surgical mask. Perfecting you, he whispered. His voice dripped with a perverse excitement, as if my body were nothing more than a canvas for his twisted art. You see, humans are so fragile, so incomplete. But you will be the masterpiece. The flesh puppet, he raised his gloved hands, slick and crimson, holding a glistening scalpel that caught the harsh light. My skin prickled as the cold metal touched my side, tracing a path across exposed muscle. The horror was too vast to comprehend, my mind couldn't wrap itself around what he was saying. I was not in a hospital, I was in a charnel house, just. Breathe, he cooed, his tone almost tender. This is only the beginning. My heart hammered against my ribs. I had to get out. I had to. Gathering every ounce of willpower, I willed my legs to move. But they remained useless, limp and cold, like dead meat tethered to my still beating core. He must have noticed the panic in my eyes because he chuckled, a low, guttural sound that reverberated through the room. Oh, I see you still have hope. He turned away for a moment, rummaging through a nearby tray, and pulled out a grotesque thing, an arm. It was severed at the elbow, pale and lifeless, with mismatched patches of skin grafted onto its surface. What do you think of this one? Needs a little more articulation. Don't you agree? He laid the arm next to me, patting it like a proud craftsman admiring his work. My stomach twisted, and bile burned the back of my throat. I managed to glance at the wall to my right, where a mirror reflected the horror of my own half-flayed body. It wasn't just my abdomen, slices and stitches marred my arms, my legs. like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle not yet completed. Not yet turned into one of his puppets. A guttural scream rose. One of the puppets began to convulse violently, its body twisting in ways that made my joints ache in sympathy. Its mouth opened wide, emitting a deep, unnatural moan. The surgeon paused, his eyes flicking toward the sound, and he smiled, delighted. "Ah, it seems my last patient is finally waking up," he muttered, almost to himself. He turned back to me, his eyes gleaming with an almost childlike glee. "Don't worry, they're just adjusting to their new form. You'll go through it soon enough, no please." I rasped, trying to blink back tears. My heart pounded with raw terror. I strained against the numbness, but my limbs were leaden, paralyzed by the drugs coursing through my veins. "Please," he mocked, tilting his head as if considering my request. "There is no place for mercy here. Only perfection." With that, he brought the scalpel back to my body, the cold sting biting into my skin as he sliced deeper, searching for something only he could envision. But then, something changed. A flicker of shadow darted across the room, moving unnaturally fast. The air grew colder, heavy with a presence that made my breath hitch. The puppets around us began to tremble, their disjointed limbs rattling against their restraints. A whisper, like whine through dead leaves, filled the space. The surgeon froze, his eyes widening in momentary shock. "No. Not yet," he hissed, his voice losing its earlier confidence. He glanced around frantically, looking for the source of this unseen force. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. A guttural voice resonated from the air itself, like a chorus of agonized souls. "Your time has come." The lights flickered and dimmed, plunging the room into a blood-soaked twilight. Shadows coalesced, forming twisted figures around the surgeon. They advanced, dragging him back toward the far wall. He screamed, the sound echoing with the terror of a man who had thought himself their voices rising in a cacophony of misery and vengeance. "End it," they shrieked, their disfigured faces contorting with rage and despair. "End him." Dr. Carlisle thrashed, his scalpel falling to the floor with a clatter. His eyes met mine one last time, and I saw it, a crack in his mask, a glimpse of the monstrous ego that had driven him to this madness. And then he was gone, consumed by the shadows, his screams fading into the darkness. Silence settled over the room, thick and suffocating. My vision blurred at the edges, my consciousness slipping as the shadows drifted back to wherever they had come from. My body shuddered, the pain returning like a tidal wave crashing against my fragile sanity. I glanced at the puppets around me, their heads bowed, their eyes empty once more. They hung in their frames, silent, waiting. Was I now one of them? Would I become a part of this horrific gallery? As the darkness closed in, I felt a hand brush my arm, a puppet's broken fingers, seeking comfort. I grasped it, squeezing tight as the cold void claimed me, and somewhere, deep in the recesses of that blood-soaked theater, I heard a whisper, "We are never free." When I woke again, there was no sense of time or place, only pain. My skin felt stretched, stitched back together in some unnatural pattern. The surgical lights were gone, replaced by a dim, sickly red glow. I blinked, trying to clear the crust from my eyes, only to realize I couldn't move my arms. They were strapped down, bound tightly in place. A soft shuffle echoed in the darkness. It was faint, like someone dragging a bag of wet rags across the floor. My heart skipped a beat, racing to match the rising tide of panic in my chest. I wasn't alone. Someone, or something, was in the room with me. "Hello?" I croaked, my voice barely more than a whisper, raw and strained. My throat burned, each word a knife scraping across. Silence hung in the air, thick and expectant. Then, a faint giggle drifted from the shadows, high-pitched and childlike, yet carrying a note of grotesque mockery. "You're awake," the voice sang, almost gleeful. "Awake to play with us." A figure emerged from the gloom, lurching into the dim red light. It was a man, or rather, what used to be a man. His body was a patchwork of skin and bone, sewn together in jagged, haphazard lines. His face was a nightmare, eyes sunken deep into his skull, lips stitched into a twisted smile that exposed raw gums and teeth. My stomach lurched at the sight. I tried to look away, but I was trapped, held in place by invisible bonds. The man-creature tilted its head, studying me with that grotesque grin. "Don't be scared," he cooed, his voice like nails on a chalkboard. "We're all beautiful here. Master Carlisle made sure of that." Carlisle. The name hit me like a jolt of electricity. The surgeon. That monstrous, god-complex surgeon. He was gone, dragged into the darkness by those shadowy horrors. But his legacy remained. I was in his lair, his hellish playground, surrounded by his twisted creations. "Let me go," I whispered, my eyes darting around the room. The shadows writhed and stretched, hints of movement in the periphery of my vision. "Please." "No," the creature replied, his voice suddenly cold. His smile faltered, replaced by an expression of grim resolve. "Not until it's finished." What's finished?" I stammered, my mind racing through fragments of memories and flashes of the operating room. The scalpel, my own insides on display, the puppet screaming for mercy. A horrible realization clawed at the edges of my consciousness. "You," he breathed, inching closer until I could smell the rot emanating from his flesh. "You are the final piece." "No." I screamed, thrashing against my restraints. Pain shot through my body as if I were being torn apart again. I could feel stitches tugging against raw skin, threatening to rip open. But my arms remained bound, held fast by leather straps that cut into my wrists. The man-creature clucked his tongue, his mutilated face twisting into a mockery of pity. "There is no escape, little one. This place. It binds us all." His eyes darted to the darkness, to the writhing shadows that whispered and giggled at the edges of the room. "We serve the Master, even when he is gone." The shadows stirred as if responding to his words. A chill swept through the room, and suddenly, I felt it, a presence. The air grew heavy, suffused with an unseen force that pressed down on my chest. It was as if the very room was alive, watching me, waiting for my next move. "Do you see them?" The man-creature hissed, eyes wide with something between fear and awe. "The others. They are the true masters here. And they demand a puppet to complete their collection." My pulse quickened. The others. Were they the shadows? The things that had dragged Carlisle away? I remembered their voices, the way they had hissed and whispered as they consumed him. A knot of terror tightened in my stomach. They were still here, lingering, hungry for something more. "I won't become one of you." I spat, rage igniting somewhere deep within me. I fought against the straps, adrenaline surging through my veins. A small part of me expected to feel bones snap or skin tear, but all I felt was resistance, an invisible force that pushed back against my will. The man-creature chuckled, a low, wet sound that bubbled up from his throat. "You think you have a choice?" He stepped back, raising his arms in a grotesque flourish. "This is the theater of pain, the puppet master's realm. And he—" "No." I screamed. The shadows around us thickened, oozing forward like ink spreading across paper. Faces formed within them, distorted, eyeless visages that twisted and shifted, mouths open in silent screams. The air grew colder, the lights dimming until all that remained was the crimson glow bathing us in an unholy aura. No, no. I whimpered, straining against the darkness closing in. My skin tingled, a sickening sensation of being watched, touched by something not of this world. Then, a voice, deep and echoing, filled the room. It was the same voice I had heard before, the one that had condemned Carlisle to his fate. Finish the puppet. The words reverberated through my skull, pressing against my sanity. The man-creature's eyes gleamed with maniacal excitement as he turned to me, holding out his hands. They were smeared with blood, his fingers adorned with shards of bone like makeshift claws. Time to sculpt, he whispered, his voice trembling with reverence. Time to complete you, no. I screamed, thrashing as hard as I could. My vision blurred with the intensity of my struggle. Something inside me, some primal survival instinct, snapped. I yanked my arm upward with every ounce of strength, and suddenly, something gave. A searing pain tore through my wrist as the strap broke, flesh ripping away with it. I swung my arm wildly, striking the man-creature in the face. He staggered back with a howl, clutching at his ruined cheek, but I didn't stop. Adrenaline surged as I ripped the other strap free, ignoring the agony as my skin split open, blood spraying onto the floor. Run. I gasped to myself, stumbling off the table. I fell to the ground, my legs barely responding, but I forced them to move. I crawled toward the door, leaving a slick trail of blood behind me. The shadows shrieked, the voices of the others rising to a cacophony. You cannot leave. You belong to us. No, I snarled, teeth gritted against the pain. No, I snarled, teeth gritted against the pain. I don't belong to anyone. I reached the door, fingers scrabbling for the handle. It felt cold and slimy under my touch, but I yanked it open. A blast of frigid air struck me, howling like the wails of the dead. Darkness loomed beyond, a void filled with whispers and laughter. Step through, a voice murmured from the blackness. And be free. I hesitated, heart thudding in my chest. Free. Could this be a trick? A trap? But then, behind me, I heard the man-creature's frenzied footsteps. No. You must be completed. He screamed, his voice cracking with desperation. The darkness wrapped around me like a wet shroud, suffocating in cold. I stumbled forward, my legs shaking beneath me, each step an agony as raw wounds bled freely. I couldn't tell where I was going, only that I needed to move, to keep the horrors behind me at bay. The air grew thick, filled with whispers that brushed against my ears like icy breath. You can't escape. They murmured, voices low and mocking. You will always belong to us. No. I shouted, my voice cracking. You don't own me. Silence fell, the darkness compressing against my skin, cold and damp. For a moment, I thought I'd made it. I thought I'd finally broken free of that blood-soaked chamber and the twisted creatures that haunted it. I blinked, squinting into the blackness, willing my eyes to adjust. Gradually, an outline formed. A door, faint and distant, barely visible in the swirling void. It glowed with a faint, sickly light that drew me forward, the promise of an escape so tantalizing that I could almost taste it. I pushed myself toward it, each step a brutal reminder of the damage done to my body. As I neared, I noticed carvings on the door's surface, intricate, winding patterns that seemed to pulse and writhe under the faint light. Symbols. Faces. Eyes. The door was alive, my breath hitched as I reached for the handle, hesitating. This was it, my way out. Or perhaps my final trap. Could I trust what lay beyond? The air around me thrummed with tension, and the whispers grew louder, pressing against my skull, filling my mind with doubt and dread. "Open it." A voice crooned from within the door. It wasn't Carlisle's voice or the man-creature's, but something else entirely, something older, patient, yet infinitely cruel. "Open it and see what you truly are." My hand trembled as I grasped the handle, cold and slick against my palm. I swallowed, teeth clenching so hard they ached. There was no turning back now. With a deep breath, I yanked the door open. The light that spilled out was blinding, a harsh white that seared my eyes. I staggered, shielding my face with my arm, the world spinning around me. When the light faded, I found myself standing in a room. An ordinary, sterile, surgical room. My heart sank. I turned slowly, my stomach twisting into knots. The room was clean, pristine. No blood, no shadows. Just white walls and stainless steel surfaces gleaming under fluorescent lights. On the far side stood a row of surgical instruments, neatly arranged on a tray. There was no sign of the horrors I had just escaped. No sign of the puppets or the man-creature. A chill ran down my spine. Was this another illusion? A new trap? I turned back to the door, but it was gone. The wall behind me was blank, smooth, as if the door had never existed. Panic surged, and I spun around, searching for any means of escape, my heart pounding in my ears. Then I saw it, a figure reflected in the glass of a nearby cabinet. My blood turned to ice. Slowly, I stepped closer, my eyes locked onto the reflection. It was me, but not me. My body was marred with jagged scars, stitches crisscrossing my skin like a nightmarish patchwork quilt. My face was a pale mask, eyes hollow and distant. I raised a hand to my mouth in horror, but the reflection didn't mimic me. It simply stared, grinning its ghastly, stitched grin. "No." I gasped, stumbling back. "No, this isn't real." But the reflection remained, staring at me with dead, empty eyes. I backed away, pressing my back against the cold wall, my heart hammering against my ribs. The whispers returned, slithering around me like snakes. "Look at yourself," they hissed. "You are the puppet now." My head spun, a wave of nausea washing over me. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing the nightmare to end. This couldn't be real. I was me. I wasn't one of those twisted creatures. I wasn't. A soft laugh echoed through the room. Low and mocking. I opened my eyes, and my reflection's mouth moved, stretching into a smile of grotesque amusement. "Welcome back," it rasped in a voice that was mine and yet not mine. It raised a stitched, scarred hand, pointing toward the surgical table in the center of the room. My stomach dropped as I followed its gesture. On the table lay a body, covered with a white sheet. I didn't want to see. I didn't want to know. But my feet moved of their own accord, carrying me forward until I stood beside the table. Trembling, I reached out, grasping the edge of the sheet, my breath coming in ragged gasps. With a jerk, I yanked the sheet away, the world around me lurched, and I staggered back. My legs giving out. The body on the table was me, or at least, what I once was. Whole. Unmarked. Peaceful. My eyes were closed, face calm and serene, untouched by the horrors I had endured. "No." I whispered, shaking my head, my vision blurring. "No, I'm right here. I'm the puppet." My reflection's voice cut in, echoing with grim finality. I glanced back at the glass cabinet. The figure within stared at me with pity, its stitched face tilting in mock sympathy. "You cannot escape," it said. "You." My mind reeled, spinning with terror and confusion. If that was my body on the table, if this twisted, stitched-up creature was now me, what had I become? Where was I? A slow, rhythmic clapping filled the room, each beat sending a jolt through my bones. I turned, and there he was, Dr. Carlisle. He stood in the corner, shadowed, his eyes gleaming with that same monstrous hunger. "Well done," he purred, stepping forward. "You've completed the journey. You've become perfect." I screamed, a sound that ripped from the very core of my being, echoing through the sterile room. But as the scream died down, I realized something horrifying. The room was silent. My scream had not left my lips. It had come from the walls themselves, reverberating back at me, mocking and ceaseless. And then the light flickered, the darkness creeping back in, curling around the corners of the room. The door, the same door, appeared again, closed, waiting. Carlisle's form faded into the shadows, his laughter lingering like a foul stench in the air. The whispers surged, and the room seemed to warp, spinning around me. I was trapped in this cycle, in this never-ending labyrinth of horror. My reflection grinned at me one last time, its eyes gleaming with wicked delight. "What will you do now?" it asked, voice thick with amusement. "Will you open the door again?" I stood there, trembling, eyes fixed on the door. The final choice loomed before me: step through and face what lay beyond, or remain here, trapped in this maddening, blood-soaked purgatory.